Karen and I are delighted to be here with all of you today. I wanted to start by giving you just a little bit of background about us and Insight Experience. Our core business is to create dynamic business simulation-based learning experiences. Our simulations enable participants and leaders to practice and learn and really to understand how their leadership impacts business results and make the connections between what they do day to day and the results that they create. All of our experiences are group-based because we believe that leaders learn from each other as well as from experience. And the observations and insights that we're going to share with you today come from our work globally across multiple industries, largely with a focus on Fortune 1000 clients, but working with clients of all sizes who address this challenge of enabling leaders to deliver results and be more successful in their roles. We focus at Insight Experience on 4 core leadership challenges. These are challenges that, in our experience, we believe are the places where leaders make a difference in their organizations and in delivering results. We help leaders expand their strategic perspective and have a broader view of the challenges that they and their organizations face. We help leaders think about how to effectively execute strategy and build their skills to do that. We help leaders navigate the complexity of organizations that now have multiple geographic and functional boundaries and structures, so leading in those complex environments. And we spend time focused on the challenge that we're going to talk about today, developing first-level leaders, those people that have enormous impact on the business because they are the ones that are closest to your customer. Today, we thought we'd talk about 4 things. First, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why first-level leaders are so important and who those folks are. Second, we're going to give you an opportunity to actually engage in some experiential learning, to work through a first-level leader scenario and see the results and insights that you can generate going through a simulation experience as a first-level leader. We want to share with you some of our experience and observations about the skills that first-level leaders need to be successful. And then we want to make sure that we save some time to answer your questions. As I start to talk just a little bit about first-level leaders, I want to clarify vocabulary. First-level leaders are referred to by all kinds of catchphrases in the research and academic press and in organizations. They can be called frontline leaders. They can be called new managers. Often they're people that are new in role, but sometimes they're people that have been individual contributors for a number of years and are only recently moved into first-level leadership positions. These folks, as I mentioned before, have an incredibly important role in generating your business results because of their proximity to not only your frontline performers, but through those performers to your customers. It's those first-level leaders that really shape the customer experience, that enable employee engagement, that are the first line when there's a problem or an issue or a challenge in the field that your customers see often before senior management or senior leadership. In fact, in a recent study done by the Harvard Business Review, where they went out and asked senior leaders how important frontline managers are to achieving their business results, over 70%, and in some cases 77% of the leaders who responded said that frontline managers are vitally important, not just to delivering customer satisfaction. We think about it that way because they're the ones that are working with customers, but also to enabling the organization to deliver on business goals, to drive productivity, to enable employee engagement, and to take messages from senior levels down into the organizations, into the front line. These leaders are a critical lever to a business being able to achieve its vision and objectives. Given how important they are, it's interesting to try to understand how satisfied corporate leaders are with frontline leader performance, this critical role. So in our first opportunity for you to use that polling software, I'm interested in your view as to how satisfied corporate leaders are with frontline leader performance. Are they extremely satisfied, very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, not at all satisfied, or you're not really sure? I'll take a minute for those of you to reply as you think about that question. You'll see, and Andrew, I think you could share those results with the group.
Absolutely, they're now visible, everybody. So it looks like we're kind of little middle ground here. People are somewhat satisfied with frontline leader performance, at least from the corporate perspective of those organizations represented from our attendees today.
Absolutely, but look at what's interesting is how few of you, although some late voters, how few of you actually believe that corporate leaders are extremely satisfied with frontline leader performance. In fact, your responses are very similar to something that McKinsey found in 2010. They went out and in an executive survey of over 1,800 leaders worldwide, found that only 20% of senior leaders were very satisfied, and a much fewer number extremely satisfied with frontline manager performance. Here, these leaders are in a critical role, and yet senior executives are really concerned about the quality of the performance that frontline leaders are engaged in across the board. As you look at those results and think about the frontline leaders that you touch and work in your organizations, and think about what they do, it may be that these results aren't that surprising. The work of being a frontline leader is demanding. It's often work that has urgent timelines, is focused on solving problems, bringing together resources and working with people who may or may not have long tenure in their roles or a lot of technical skills. There are a number of challenges in the current frontline leader role, and yet as all of us who work with leadership development and thinking about the challenges facing organizations see the challenges that are occurring globally in shifts in leadership development, we see that these will also impact frontline leaders. Trends like flattening organizations that mean these frontline leaders will have more direct reports and more responsibility. Complex business structures that means they will be reporting to and accountable to a broader range of executives and demands. The shifts in the demographics in the workforce mean that frontline leaders are our front line to helping address some of the shifts in how do you lead and motivate and engage millennials, as well as the transformation of big data and information tracking means that the information to measure, monitor, incent, and drive results at the frontline level is also transforming. Frontline work is a tough job and a tough place to be. Given that, you'd hope that frontline leaders get support to do what they do. But in fact, recent data suggests that that's not the case. A recent Career Builder survey said that 26% of managers said they weren't ready to become a leader when they started managing others. That's not surprising. Often leaders are best or are promoted from our best doers, the folks that are able to perform the task as opposed to lead a team. So many felt that they weren't ready to step into that role. But 58% also said that they didn't receive any management training. So the response to that gap, even though we know it's there, isn't consistent across the board. A survey of senior executives by the Harvard Business Review found a piece of data that really corroborates this. 12% of respondents said they currently invest sufficiently in the development of frontline managers. 12%. That means the inverse. 88% feel like they invest insufficiently in this critical role in their organization. So the work is hard but important. It's getting tougher, and the expectation of time to competency is getting even faster. As we face increased turnover, shorter time in role from a number of first-level leaders. Their time to master the skills of being a first-level leader is often accelerated as well. It's a big opportunity, and when we step back and look at the skills that first-level leaders need to develop, we see in our work a set of 4 really key skills that are the world of first-level leaders. Most of them have started with and have at least core skills in that upper purple right quadrant where they're able to execute the work. But they have to grow from doing that work themselves to being able to do that through others, deciding and delivering and managing the work of a team. Not only that, but they then need to be able to build their skills around thinking strategically. Are they taking on and doing the right work? Even if they have strong execution skills, their perspective and what they think about and how they address the challenges that they face is an opportunity for first-level leaders. As good as they get at doing the work above the line, they also need to be developing people and relationships, developing their team to have the skills to be able to deliver work and deliver work for the organization over time, as well as the ability to work across boundaries as the job of first-level leaders becomes increasingly collaborative and requiring influence and interdependent activity across organizations. It's these sets of 4 skills that we believe first-level leaders really need to develop. What we've also observed is that those 4 buckets of skills can feel somewhat conceptual. In fact, as we look at helping first-level leaders be successful, our goal is to give them behaviors that are the visible evidence of those skills, to help them understand what to do, how to act, and how their actions are perceived by their teams that will enable them to actually take this understanding and put it into practice in order to improve their performance. So the work that we do focuses on not just understanding, but also acting, being able to translate those ideas into action. It's a tall order. And the question many of you on this call, I suspect, have asked, not just on this webinar, but before, is this one. How can first-level leaders really develop these skills? What can we do to accelerate their ability to not only understand that they need to build these skills, but to master them? And the answer, not surprisingly, because it's true for most of us, is just do it. First-level leaders like to learn by doing. For the most part, they are engaged, active, motivated leaders who want to do well, who want to stretch themselves and want to build their talents. But they don't have a lot of patience for extended classroom learning. They want to learn from experience. They want to learn by taking on the challenges and demonstrating that they can deliver against them. That learning by doing, we know, is a really powerful way for adults to learn, but there is a caveat. Experience can be haphazard. Experience can be, people can, as they take on new experiences, those experiences may not be consistent across the whole population of first-level leaders. When something happens, it may not happen repeatedly so that people, first-level leaders, can repeat that experience and be able to really solidify their learning. That experience may not happen with a peer or a mentor there to help coach a first-level leader to be able to develop. Given that experience can be haphazard, it may not be the best way to fill that gap between performance and the value of this role. And that's where we come in. Our experience is that business simulations become a challenging, consistent, and repeatable way for first-level leaders to experience the challenges that they need to experience in order to grow and develop their skills. Simulations are really rooted in the idea of practice. We know from the popular press, from Malcolm Gladwell and other researchers that have studied the power of practice, that there's great value to practice in almost every domain, whether it's athletics or school or music, in part because it's learning from experience. But there are 5 other really important reasons that practice is a valuable way to learn. The first is it focuses the attention. Having to make decisions and engage actively in content really gets a learner's attention so that they're engaged and focused on the topic at hand. The second is that practice reinforces behaviors. It builds muscle memory that is a skill that we all can use and draw on when asked to put these practices into practice and apply them back on the job. The third is that practice requires that you demonstrate integration. No first-level leader uses the skills that I just talked about a few minutes ago in isolation. They actually have to put all of those skills into practice as they address issues that they face back on the job. The fourth is that practice enables comparison. It lets you benchmark to others to understand how you could improve. It also lets you benchmark to yourself to understand your progress over time. And when it does that, it builds your confidence. It enables a first-level leader to feel more confident that the choices that they would make back on the job would be the right ones and be choices that they could live with over time. So there's value to practice in every domain. Why not leadership? The other element that a simulation does is create learning across a variety of domains. It expands what a first-level leader considers, the ideas and insights and information that they take in as they make decisions. It helps them think differently about the trade-offs and choices that they face in any given situation. It gives them the opportunity to practice and put into their behaviors the ideas that they've just talked about as they take those ideas out into interactions back on the job. Most powerfully, simulations create a feedback loop. We know that as adults, we learn not just from experience, but from reflecting on that experience, from understanding how our actions generated results, and those results, whether they are what we intended or not, help us understand more about the value of our actions. It's that feedback loop that simulations can create in addition to the repetition of practice that can be really powerful for a first-level leader. So I could keep talking in this webinar about this topic, but we thought it would be more valuable to give you an opportunity to practice. So let's learn from an experience. Karen, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. So we thought it would be useful to give you an opportunity to experience a simulation scenario to illustrate how this type of learning can accelerate time to experience for first-level leaders. So I'll introduce you to a scenario, ask you to make 2 decisions, and then we'll show you the impact of those decisions for a first-level leader going through this type of experience. So first I'm going to introduce you to your role in the team that you're working with in this scenario. You are a project leader working with a team of 4 individuals. You can see from this organization chart that 2 of those individuals report directly to you, and 2 of them have a dotted line reporting relationship to you. So they actually report into other parts of the organization. Our scenario today will focus on one team member. Her name is Olivia Chen, and she's a technical expert from the Regulatory Affairs Organization. And we'll now give you some more background information on Olivia. So Olivia is staff to your team, but she does report into another manager. What you know about Olivia from working with her is that she's very data-driven. She has high technical skills, good business acumen. She's been in her role for 4 years. So you have high confidence that she knows how to do her job. What you have noticed, however, about Olivia is that her people skills tend to be low to moderate. She doesn't have a great network in the organization, and communication is definitely not her strength. So let's take a look at some more information about the project specifically so that you can start to think about how Olivia fits in. The project that you are working on with this team has a lot of visibility in the organization. So senior leadership is really paying attention to it. It's high profile, and there are a couple of things that are going on that have added pressure to your team. One is the time frame. Typically, your team finishes a project like this in 6 to 8 weeks, but you've been asked to do it in 4. Also, the scope has been increased beyond what your team is accustomed to delivering in that 6 to 8 week time frame. So you're being asked to deliver more in less time. I'm sure this probably sounds familiar to many of you on the call today. It's also important to note that Olivia's work is critical to the success of your team, so it is important that she deliver. So let's go ahead and introduce you to one particular interaction that you have with Olivia on a morning of a really critical stage of the project. You approach Olivia and explain to her that you're checking on the progress on the manufacturing requirements document, and you'd like to know if she's received any feedback from them yet. Olivia responds, "No. I gave you the document yesterday and was assuming you would present it to them. I don't know the manufacturing team lead." So as you can probably imagine how you would be feeling as Olivia's leader and as the project leader in this particular situation. So this is a typical scenario that we would present to first-line leaders and ask them to think about how they would respond. And I'm going to ask you to think about how you would respond in 2 different ways. The first decision that I'm going to ask you to make is to pick what would your leadership approach be with Olivia in this situation. And I'd like you to think about that along this continuum. So if we think about what leaders do on the left-hand side of this continuum with a more directive approach, we know that leaders would be doing more telling than asking. There would be close supervision to the execution of the task that you've asked them to do. You would probably be making more of the decisions than the person who is actually implementing them. On the other end of this continuum is a more developmental approach. And here you would be giving air cover and support, but you wouldn't necessarily giving very tactical specific guidance on how to do it or where and when and with whom. So you're giving input, you're available when needed, but really the other person is empowered to make those decisions. Obviously, in any different situation or with a certain individual, you may land somewhere in the middle of those 2 extremes along this continuum. So for the first decision in the simulation scenario, I'd like you to go ahead and think about which leadership approach you think is most appropriate for Olivia in this situation. And to do that, you can use your polling technology, just like the last time that we used this, and choose one of these 5 options. Do you think a highly directive approach, a somewhat directive approach, an even mix between directive and developmental, a somewhat developmental, or a highly developmental approach is most appropriate in this situation? I'll go ahead and give another couple of seconds here for folks to respond. Some interesting, diverse responses coming in. Okay. And Andrew, we can go ahead and show those results to the group. Okay, so interesting. What we can see is that we actually have some responses across all 5 of those different options. Some of you thought that a more directive approach was appropriate in this situation, probably because you are at a critical stage in the project, you are feeling frustrated with Olivia, and you probably feel as though she should have known what to do, and you just need to make this happen. Just so you know, in the classroom with first-level leaders, we would have a lot of discussion about this because we would also see a variety of responses. Others of you thought a more developmental approach would be appropriate, and I'm guessing that's probably because this is a pretty skilled employee, and you're concerned about how she might respond to a more directive approach. So let's look further at how we would help first-level leaders understand how they should make this decision. What can influence their approach to any situation or with a certain individual? Well, certainly it's the nature of the task. Is this a task that requires more creativity and planning and long-term long-term advance notice, or is it a more detailed, specific task that can be done in the short term? The skill of the employee, how experienced is this person? How well do they understand what they need to do? How motivated is the employee to get it done? We've all certainly worked with folks who were pretty skilled but didn't have the motivation to achieve it. And then finally, the time available. Is it a short turnaround, or do you have more time to plan and collaborate with that person? So these are tools that we would help the first level leader think about before they kind of make that upfront strategic decision about how to approach this situation with Olivia. Now, I'd like to give you some additional information about the situation because I would like to see your response to another action in response to it. So you realize, having this conversation with Olivia, that she's been working on other projects. Remember, Olivia doesn't report to you. She reports elsewhere in the organization. And you are realizing that she has taken no action on your project for 24 hours. It's also important for you to know that you personally cannot do the work for her for another day because of other meetings and work that you are doing to help keep the project on track. You realize that she has a limited personal network, and you're concerned that she chose to wait for direction rather than to initiate action in this case. So what I'd like to do now is to ask you to make another decision in response to Olivia, and in this decision, you're actually going to select your top 2 next steps of what you would do with Olivia. Would you, A, schedule a meeting to discuss Olivia's work with manufacturing and include her in that meeting? Would you, B, ask Olivia to check in with other team members to see if they need help today? C, introduce Olivia to the contact in manufacturing and ask them to work together on this approval phase? D, review the project objectives with Olivia and confirm her role in delivering results? Or E, meet with Olivia and focus on proactive communication? So remember, you can pick 2 from these 5 options. Which do you think are the top 2 responses to this situation? And I see some results coming in. We'll just give you a couple more seconds to think about how you would respond, whether you would schedule a meeting, ask Olivia to check in with others, introduce her to the contact in manufacturing, review those project objectives with her, or meet with her to focus on proactive communication. Okay, Andrew, I think we can go ahead and show these results. Great. So here, it's really interesting. And what's also important to note here is that in a real classroom setting, we would also see this kind of diversity, which makes for a really good conversation. So we saw several different responses across the 5 options, lots of you choosing that middle one to introduce Olivia to her contact. I think what's probably of most interest to you is to get a little bit more insight into why folks made these decisions, but also what kind of feedback a first-level leader would get after making them. So let's go ahead and talk about the impact that those decisions may have had on Olivia and the situation. So these were the 5 options that were available to you, and there were probably lots of different factors that went into your decision-making criteria. Let's just take a look at these in some different categories. So several of these options: to schedule a meeting to discuss her work with manufacturing yourself, to ask her to go ahead and check in with others, or to just review those project objectives and remind her what she's supposed to be doing, those tended to be more on the directive end of the options that were available to you. And several of you thought that was an appropriate approach for Olivia, so we're not surprised to see that some of you chose those. Likely first-level leaders would choose that because they're really interested in moving the project along at this stage of the process, and probably also feel some frustration with Olivia because of her skill level and the fact that she didn't initiate action. What you want to be careful about in being overly directive with someone like Olivia is that she is a skilled, experienced employee, and so you would need to support these kinds of decisions with good communication and rationale so that she understands why you're taking that approach at this point. Another option available to you, which actually most of you chose, was to introduce Olivia to the contact in manufacturing. This was a good choice because you were probably thinking about some of the root causes of this issue, one of them being that Olivia has a pretty limited network. So you want to broaden that network, role model what it means for her to go ahead and take initiative in the situation, and also help develop her people skills because that is not her strength. You also might have chosen, and as some of you did, to have a meeting with Olivia and focus on proactive communication. Now, why would you do that when that's not going to have an immediate impact on getting these manufacturing specs approved? Well, because one of the root causes of the fact that 24 hours has gone by without action is that Olivia is not great with proactive communication. And so helping her to develop that skill will help develop her performance in the future. Another piece that we could encourage first-level leaders to practice with Olivia on would be to give them a process for coaching. The one that we use at Insight Experience is called TOPS Approach to Coaching, and ask them to role-play coaching conversations either in person or virtually in response to this situation. And in the TOPS approach to coaching, they would be level setting with Olivia about what the current situation is. What is today's situation? They would be practicing communicating what their objective is in the scenario, discussing with her different alternatives for the path that she could take to reach that objective, and then finally being clear about next steps. We think it's important to give first-level leaders a process like this for a few different reasons. One, it helps to illustrate for them the importance of preparation. When you're a first-level leader, having these difficult conversations is arguably one of the most challenging pieces for them to develop in. And so having a process like this that helps them to prepare and think ahead about everything they need to cover and what they're going to say, what questions they're going to ask is really critical. It also helps them be thorough in the process of that conversation. We all have natural tendencies to migrate to one or two of these different parts of the process and might not necessarily cover all of them. And finally, it gives a nice structure for someone to observe that role play and give the person role-playing the coach feedback. And so it's a good format to get feedback in so that they understand where they were strong and where they might still need to develop. So you might be wondering what we often see in the classroom or with real first-level leaders in this situation. And here are just some examples of what we might see. First of all, folks might misassess Olivia. They might not be right on target with where she needs to be in the most appropriate leadership approach because they're having a more emotional or short-term reaction to the situation. Also, we might see inconsistencies, so the apples to oranges, between the leadership approach and the next actions that they took. Really important for first-level leaders to understand that that would confuse Olivia if they articulated one style and then behaved in a really different way. And finally, we would often see them in that coaching practice sometimes forgetting the intention of what they were originally trying to achieve in that conversation, perhaps just jumping into action, forgetting to really articulate what their next steps are. Those are some ways in which accelerating the time to experience is so valuable for them in this experience because they're being allowed to make and learn from those mistakes in a risk-free setting. So what are the lessons from Olivia for first-level leaders about this particular scenario that people would learn from going through this experience? First of all, thoughtful planning for what your most suitable approach is with each individual team member really improves your ability to react in the moment. When you're feeling frustrated and stressed in the moment, you may migrate to where you feel naturally comfortable rather than where is the best place for that particular person or the situation. Also, choosing actions that are consistent with your leadership approach will help you to avoid that apples to oranges confusion that we talked about on the previous slide. And they would also learn that they need to address the immediate issue. Clearly, they need to get the manufacturing document moving forward, but they also need to be thinking about the root cause. which leads us to the next point, which is that first-level leaders could benefit from learning that they can use every opportunity with people who are on their team, whether they work for them or not, to develop that team member for their future performance. Now, the way that we would communicate the impact in some of the lessons from this situation with Olivia is in a few different formats, and Amanda's going to go ahead and walk you through those.
Thanks, Karen. So you can see how a scenario like this provides all sorts of opportunities for first-level leaders to engage in a challenge and learn from that experience. One of the ways that you learn is by virtue of the feedback that you get. And simulations can generate 4 different types of feedback on a situation like Olivia. At the first level, coming from a simulation, you'll get some qualitative feedback from your fictional Olivia about how she felt and what she did as a result of the choices that you made. That's the kind of feedback that you get in real life as you observe your team members and what they do as a result of your leadership. At a second level, a participant who goes through an experience like this gets really detailed feedback on how they coached Olivia, how they actually engaged in that conversation, and their strengths as well as the opportunities that they have to improve. Beyond those 2 types of feedback, a simulation provides quantitative feedback. In this case, we model the capabilities of each of your direct reports. You see their names across the bottom of this slide. The red bars are Olivia's. Now, there are 4 Olivias represented here because there were 4 teams working in this simulation experience. And what the teams understand by looking at a chart like this is that Team 1, through the choices that they made about their leadership style, their actions, their coaching of Olivia, helped her build more skills than, for example, did Team 4. And they can have a conversation about what each of them did differently in influencing and growing their team members. All of this data gives participants direct feedback on the impact of their leadership on their team members. But beyond that, a simulation can also provide a 4th kind of feedback, which is feedback that connects their leadership to the business results the first-level leader was trying to accomplish. In this case, Olivia's boss, you, were trying to ensure that your project delivered on time, within budget, and at a high quality for your ultimate needs. This simulation provides feedback not just on your relationship with Olivia, but how you did on meeting those business results. That creates the final link in the logic between how you behave as a first-level leader driving the business performance that you're responsible for. We've just shown you one snippet of an experience when, in fact, in order to really build a set of first-level leader skills, we'd challenge them with multiple types of scenarios and give them the opportunity to practice, not just in terms of how they manage their direct reports, but how they manage peers, customers, bosses, suppliers, internal customers, in order to give them a range of opportunities to practice, to engage in a debrief discussion, similar to what Karen walked you through in a one-sided way on this webinar, but then to give you the opportunity to think about how to apply those skills to real work, to sit back and say, how do I apply what I just learned about Olivia to the Olivias that I have as members of my team back on the job, and to reflect on that with a learning partner. Our simulation experiences enable participants to go through that cycle multiple times in order to build their skills across a wide variety of best practices for first-level leaders in those 4 domains. The domains of being able to decide and deliver in the upper right, to developing your people by being able to assess and coach. That's really the scenario where Olivia sits, to being able to work across boundaries and think strategically. Beyond knowing that first-level leaders learn best through experience, what we also have experienced in our programs is that first-level leaders learn best with specific tools and techniques that they can take and apply. they're really anxious to have tips and ideas for how to tackle the challenges that they face. So our simulations cover a wide variety of tools that each help build unique skills in each of those domains of first-level leadership, because ultimately it's building skill across all of those arenas that ultimately fills the gap in first leader performance and starts to provide an ROI on this investment in developing your first-level leaders.
Great. So, Amanda, let's talk more about that ROI. So how important is this? Well, let's talk first about kind of the financial and operational costs associated with not developing leaders at this level. In this global study of 300 HR executives by DDI and HR.com, we can see that 26% said their business suffered a loss in profitability due to poor frontline leadership, and 65% reported a loss in productivity. So these are financial and operational measures. We can also go ahead and think about how it would impact engagement. We know from this recent Gallup data on engagement that disengaged employees outnumber the engaged by nearly 2 to 1. And we can certainly assume that if that's the case across the population, that it's there or more at the first level leader. So we've thought about the financial and operational costs associated with not doing it, as well as the employee engagement piece. What are the benefits of doing it? At a macro level, if we look at this Harvard Business Review information, we can see that organizations that encourage new managers to assume leadership roles saw great benefits. For example, organizations more consistently focused on and aligned around strategy. We certainly hear participants talking about being better able to frame opportunities and work in the context and being able to communicate more strategically after going through an experiential exercise. The ability to respond more nimbly to market shifts. We hear folks talking about being more effectively working with stakeholders so that they can respond to change more quickly in the market, and also knowing how to ask better questions to understand the market, and a more engaged workforce and higher retention rates. As we saw in the case with Olivia, first-level leaders can understand how better to shift their style with different individuals and across different situations to make that happen. So we thought that a few quotes from actual first-level leaders who had gone through experiences like this would be a great way to wrap up and to help you think about the most important aspects of how you can develop your first-level leaders and to get the return on investment of that. This first one really talks mostly about context. If you can note that comment at the bottom about the being based on their industry, their competitive climate, and their culture, putting first-level leaders as closely into the context in which they are working is really important for getting good return on investment. The second quote focuses on the application, so getting learning from real-life opportunities and being able to apply those learnings to their daily work. Being able to really try and do and make mistakes and learn from is really important for first-level leaders. And then this last one talks about a more motivational element. Making the investment in leaders in their first level really helps them to feel as though there's a personal investment being made in them, which is very motivating for them to know that the organization sees them as so important. So Amanda and I would like to thank you for your participation and your attendance in the webinar today, and we would also like to continue that by inviting you to ask questions, and we'll now go ahead and take some of your questions for the remainder of our time. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Karen and Amanda. This has been a really fascinating look at accelerating time to experience for first-level leaders, and I want to thank you so much for putting this together and sharing that, and especially going and following along on Olivia's journey and finding out, the different methods for addressing those types of development issues. So I want to thank you and also remind our members that now is the time for questions. So please take a moment to enter your question into the chat box, but don't forget to attach your name to your comment so that we can respond accordingly and get a little bit more familiar and on a first name basis and give you credit for a lot of the insights and good commentary that you are bound to provide. So one of the first questions that came to mind, and I'll ask this, was kind of the concept of maybe a smaller organization or somebody that's becoming a new leader who might not have any direct reports. Are these tools still applicable for someone in that scenario?
I think that is a great question, Andrew, and it's certainly one that we receive a lot of the time. And a couple of important thoughts about that. First of all, it's important for someone, whether they have direct reports or not, that you simulate the nature of their work. So, and as you saw in the scenario about Olivia, you can design experiential scenarios about the issues that they're facing, the decision options that are available to them, and the feedback that they get from their environment, whether it be from their boss, their stakeholders, their project results, that mirrors the work that they do, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have people reporting to them, and that's okay. The other piece is that even when people don't have direct reports, most folks are getting work done through other people. They need to influence the behavior and hold people accountable. And so the lessons learned about influence, communicating within strategic context, holding people accountable, having coaching conversations on performance, those are all relevant for people, even if people are not reporting directly to them. And we see lots of folks who are in that very situation. They're working in matrixed organizations, and these lessons are all important to them. They are not the boss of the people who are working for them.
Thank you so much. So another question, I think kind of follows along the same line, and this is from Jane. And Jane asks if this training should be offered before someone even gets promoted to a first-level leadership role.
Thanks, Jane. I think that's a great question. I think that developing your leadership skills is a journey, and I think that certainly these skills are something that people can have on the horizon. They're helpful in even direct individual contributor work, and starting to recognize where an individual's strengths are, where there are opportunities for development, is something that could happen in advance of being promoted into that role, so that they can start to build the skills and be able to hit the ground running once they're moved into that position. I think that one of the things that we also know is that particularly for first level leaders, it's not once and done. This is a journey that they're on as they build their skills and as they enter into and grow in their role. So starting before and continuing after both make sense.
Thanks. So here's a little bit more of a specific question. This is coming from Tracy. Tracy's really interested in this, and I think she's got a couple of additional questions. But let's start off with this one, and that is how long, what's the duration for a typical simulation for first-time leaders?
That's a great question, Tracy. The one that we typically use is actually a 2-day experience, and that includes introducing new course content and tools, and also having folks practice in a simulation. However, many organizations with folks who are learning at this first level leadership role may need to do something more flexible, and so you could certainly turn this kind of experience into different modules that were delivered virtually on an individual basis or over time. That's really it's flexible based on the needs and the environment of those first level leaders. But the one that we typically do is a 2-day experience.
So here's a question from Emily, and this is interesting. I think it's so Leslie, or wait a minute, let me make sure I'm getting Emily. Emily asks, I would love to know how you would apply this to learning financial processes in a complex scenario where situations often depend on what the boss wants, but the boss isn't always available in terms of bandwidth. So tell us a little bit about how you might handle a circumstance like that.
Wow, that's got a lot of great complexity to it, Emily, and it has complexity in a couple different dimensions. The first is, how would you use a scenario to learn a financial process? Absolutely, scenarios are a great way to have to walk through the steps of any process or activity and practice those steps particularly in organizations that may have a lot of templates or requirements for deliverables at stages of a financial process. But I think the real question that you've wrapped around the question about a financial process is, how do you deal with inconsistent stakeholders? How do you deal with a boss who may not be available when you need him or her? How do you deal with a stakeholder who might have a really strong agenda or be focused on objectives and goals that aren't consistent with the objectives and goals that you're being tasked to accomplish? And I think it's in those situations that scenarios are particularly good practice, because the scenario can tee up the characteristics of a situation where you have to weigh trade-offs, you have to engage in a complex conversation or an influence conversation, and you get an opportunity to practice it. And by practicing and thinking ahead about those kind of dynamics, participants get a couple of things. First, they build their skills. But secondly, they also can start to think creatively about a game plan of how to address that issue back on the job, how to proactively ask that boss for input, how to figure out who else to go to get guidance in the absence of the boss's presence. All of that becomes some of that step in the learning cycle where you apply the insights to real life and think about how do you take these lessons and put them into practice.
I think it's also important to note that it is possible to simulate that financial process, but also usually processes like that yield different ways of working. So a simulation is a great way to introduce people to the scenarios that they may not have thought about. So now I understand the process. What does that mean for the kinds of meetings and conversations that this is going to yield? What kind of interpersonal issues might come up as a result of working through this process? And the simulation can kind of give a more holistic experience through that.
Thank you. I'm glad that we were able to get to the root of that complex question, and I thank you both for insightful answers on that. So I want to take a moment to speak to Leslie's questions. And so Leslie asks, what is the right time in a new leader's tenure to offer this kind of training? And then if I could add Leslie's second question, so she asked the right time in a new leader's tenure to offer this kind of training, but she also wants to know if there are other simulations for more experienced leaders, not necessarily those newly appointed frontline leaders.
Absolutely. Great question. So the right time in a new leader's tenure, well, we've certainly talked about the fact that it's never too early to have these kinds of experiences. Certainly people like to feel as though they rise into the role with a toolbox and that they can tap into. We often find that people are promoted to their first level leadership position because they had the best technical skills, whether they be a nurse or a coach or a programmer or whatever their job was as an individual contributor, they did it really well, and so they become a first-level leader. But they rise into that role not necessarily with the tools to think strategically and work across boundaries and do some of those things. So helping people think through those things, even at the high potential stage before they receive that promotion, can be really useful. However, we have found that folks who are several years into this leadership position still benefit a great deal from having these conversations. We've even had organizations put directors into this program because depending on the sophistication of that person's experience with leadership development, having these conversations now that they have lived through lots of their own experiences can be even more helpful. And also, they typically make consensus decisions in response to situations like the one with Olivia with a team of people of 4 to 5 other folks. And so the debate over those 5 action steps on how to narrow them to 2 is an incredible learning experience no matter what your tenure. In terms of simulations for other levels of leadership, absolutely. Simulations are a great way to create action learning for any level leader, and although the particular content of this one might not be the most appropriate for someone with 20 years of leadership experience, there are certainly others that would be.
I'll just build on that answer. What we find that is different at different levels of leadership are the nature of the perspective on the business or the scope of the business that the participants need to consider in the simulation or the scenario, difference in perspective on the nature of their objectives or the tensions or challenges and trade-offs that they have to weigh. So in this case, the first level leader is charged with delivering a project. More senior leaders and other levels of leaders might be challenged with running a function or a business unit or even managing multiple business units in a corporate structure and have to think through a completely different level of business tension and issue.
Thank you, Amanda. That was great clarification on that. So we're almost out of time. I do have one last question, but I want to mention to our attendees, if we did not get an opportunity to address your question, we will have ample opportunity to reach out and connect you with the folks at Insight Experience. Here's their contact information so that you can reach out and ask them offline if need be. But before we go, I just wanted to ask Amanda and Karen, how do you deal with the fact that frontline work can be so different across different industries?
Well, ultimately, frontline work, first-level leadership, is about the leadership. It's about the specific skills of being able to guide and develop, guide work, develop people, think strategically about the challenge that you've been given, and work across boundaries. And what we have found is that the skills that first-level leaders need and the skills that are largely represented in the gaps that I talked about at the start of the hour are not the technical skills about the specifics of your industry or your company, but are the leadership skills to be able to lead and manage a complex challenge over time. And that's really what these scenarios are best targeted at helping leaders develop. On behalf of Karen and myself, I just wanted to thank everybody who has participated today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. You can reach out to us, as it says on the screen, at info@insight-experience.com or follow us on Twitter at InsightXP.
Well, thank you so much, Karen and Amanda. This has been a great and insightful conversation, and I'm so glad that we were able to take part in that and get a lot of your wisdom and experience, and especially, as I mentioned before, kind of see it in action and follow along on that journey. So I thank you so much for that. I also want to thank Insight Experience for making this webcast possible. Of course, the biggest thank you of all goes to each and every one of our HCI members who took the time out of their day to spend with us today on this webcast. So on behalf of HCI Ben, myself, and the entire Human Capital Institute team, we thank you for your time and wish you a very happy rest of the day. So take care, folks, and we'll see you on the next one.